Adult workers, what was your first day on the job like? Did escorting for about a year. First day was relieving. I was terrified at first because I was given the rundown for what redheads to look out for. There were a lot. But I went on. Most of my clients ended up being older men who just wanted a pretty girl to be seen with and to listen to them. My first day felt more like a therapist than an escort. Awkward. Because I was bad at it. Former male stripper here. It was awesome. It was comedic, sexy, and fun. Just an absolute party. The crowd had a blast. We quintuple lap danced the bachelorettes. It didn't pay much. But I wasn't really in it for the money. I would totally start another show if I can make it happen. I only had 2 brief uncomfortable moments that night. First, an old woman just grabbed my goodies. Second, another old woman shoved $1 so far between my cheeks that I didn't see it until after the show. She was making a deposit. I'm long retired now, but I was 21 at the time and at a loose end. New city and no job, so decided to work at a gentleman's club as a prostitute. I'd done my research and been in for an interview, so I was feeling confident and relaxed. No one else showed up on time, so I was the only girl there on the day shift and sat chatting to the receptionists. My first client was a really good-looking English Sri Lankan guy who was really sweet and equally nervous. We both couldn't believe it was the other's first time until we were both fumbling and laughing trying to put a condom on correctly. I can't remember who else I saw that day, but I do remember getting paid more than I had earned in a week working 2 jobs. I ended up working for around 7 years and really enjoyed it. Stripped briefly to pay for a semester's worth of tuition and books. On my first day, a lady shouted, "Whip out your pecker," and I couldn't help but to laugh from both nerves and the fact she said pecker. After that, the rest seemed pretty easy. 2009. Just got back from Afghanistan. Before I went, I was confident in my moderate conservatism. By the time I got back, I was just completely different. A few months into moving to New Orleans after Afghanistan, I started exploring my mind and the constructs I had made for myself. I remember walking into the corner pocket and asking if I could dance for money. I'm a guy and that is a gay strip club. The bartender asked if I can start that night. Gave me some brand new in the package freebie men's briefs and said, "Go nuts." Pun likely intended. And I did that night. I was at the point where I was tired of who I thought I should be and wanted to know what I really liked or didn't like. And why. I am going to regret telling this story, I think. I made tips. I had a damn great body thanks to nothing but physical exercise in the sandbox. I was scared and apprehensive. But I don't think anyone could tell. I had already learned a long time ago to keep my bearing, and my bearing in that circumstances should have looked like enthusiasm and non-hesitation. I adopted those in spite of my anxiety and just tried to own it. I spent about 6 months maybe immersing myself in the gay nightlife in New Orleans. Everyone knew I was straight and mostly didn't care. I learned a lot about that community, at least in part. I am under no illusion that the gay community only embodies that side of life, though. I would say that it is still among my best decisions because I grew in emotional maturity and confidence. I knew what it would be like going into it. I'd been working for the agency for a few months as a driver, taking the girls to their appointments, making sure they didn't get robbed or killed. My boss mentioned that he had had some interest from females wanting a male escort. I'd seen Deuce Bigalow. I figured, why the hell not? I was 18, and I cleaned up pretty nice. My first client was a woman in her late 30s. Not a supermodel, but not unattractive at all. She was in town for some auto parts convention and wanted someone to show her around. We wound up sleeping together after. I got my money, and left the next morning. I did that until I moved out of state 3 years later. I was a dancer in my college years. I was so nervous not because of the dancing, but because I was afraid I didn't look as good as the other girls, they wouldn't like me. It turns out they were so sweet and so diverse. One of my coworkers had 5 young kids. One of them was a PhD candidate at one of the local universities. One of them loved to bake in her spare time. Sharing small details like that about our lives made us grow together. Most of the regulars that came in were your average guys. Nothing weird or creepy. Eventually, when you got to know them enough, they would talk about things that stressed them out, like their debt or their job, or my 13-year-old daughter is smoking. I don't know what to do, and you'd be more of a listener and advice giver instead of a sexual being. I was a male escort very briefly in the early '00s. My first call was for a married couple at a hotel room in a casino. I arrived and went to the front desk to let them know I had arrived. This was before everybody had a cell phone, and I was told to wait in the lobby. It seemed like forever, and the longer I waited, the more nervous I became. Until the wife walked up to me and asked if I was Jeremy, fake name. She was very attractive, and that was a relief. She took me up to their room where her husband was waiting nude in a chair. He was very much not attractive. He started barking orders at us to undress and do this and do that. I was fine with that. Like I said, she was very attractive. Eventually he decides to join in, and it suddenly is very awkward as he's quite out of shape and is having difficulty doing pretty much anything. This goes on for a while until he gets upset and huffs "We're done here," and rolls off the bed to look outside the window and, I don't know, pout. I get dressed in a hurry while the wife is at the bar making a drink, wearing just his shirt, with a weird smile on her face. I try to quietly take my leave, but she grabs me by the arm, almost drowns me by pouring this drink down my throat, gives me a kiss and pushes me out the door. I felt a little weird, but I made $300 in less than an hour. I think I was just too young and inexperienced back then. I could be a pretty good escort now, but my selling point back then was that I looked younger than I was. And now I look like a fat extra from Sons of Anarchy. Anyway, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great. 5/10 for the hot wife. Was a stripper in my late teens. First day I was nervous as Some drunk dude walks up to the stage waving a dollar bill and said, "Slap your ass. I'll give you $1. Oddly enough, that made me somehow more comfortable with the whole thing. I actually enjoyed it, and wasn't half bad. Made more money legally from 17 to 20 than any other job I had until like 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. I was 18 and naive. My first client chose me because I was new, fresh meat. He was a regular at the club. I was terrified but went along with it. He made me call him daddy, and every time he pushed into me I winced from pain. He secretly took the condom off. The manager or girl who gave me an introduction tour never warned me of clients trying to take off condoms. I couldn't tell management about him since he was a regular at the club. They also never told me there was an emergency button to leave the room if I needed to. I only learned 3 years later when a client beat me. That's when I decided it was my last day. I did phone sex for a bit, and the first day was awkward. I felt like I was in a corny porno from the 80s. There were also a surprisingly high number of men that asked which area I lived in and were weirdly insisting on knowing. I'm guessing BC it was over the phone, it felt more real to them. After a couple of hours I got into my role, and moaning like a bad actress became easier and funnier, but the first hours definitely felt awkward. A bit intimidating, but not really much different. If anything, I had a little better of an idea of what I was doing compared to working at Starbucks. I'm 21 and was an oil wrestler for a short time just last year, and I was terrified. I had no practice or was shown anything. I made $10 in tips that night, but as it went on for the next 3 weeks, I began making more. The girls were really clique-y and at times total bitches. The men we entertained were disgusting low hygiene cowboys and rude as Not my scene, but nothing but respect for the women who are able to have fun in that environment. Gay male here. I had a pretty bad drug problem and would get money to fund it by posting on Craigslist to exchange sex for money or drugs in a few rare instances. My first day on the job, I had actually posted just to have a casual hookup for fun, but a guy that responded wasn't my type. But he offered me money to hook up, and I pretty much said okay because I was on drugs. I was really nervous that it was a cop, but he ended up being a really nice guy. I realized I could make it a hustle, and ended up having sex pretty much once a day for money for like 3 years straight. Most of the guys were really normal, nice guys. I had a few scary times where the house would be nasty and roach infested, or they'd refuse to pay me and we'd argue. It was all done through Craigslist and I'd never send a face pics. just body or X-rates pics. I don't think I would have accepted the initial offer if I wasn't on drugs. But as my addiction got worse, I relied on prostitution more and more and basically become a professional sex worker. I am since off drugs for a few years, and I used to look back on prostitution as shameful, but I have accepted and grown, and it's a part of my past. I was kicked out, left on my own. It's complicated at 19. I saw the writing on the wall and needed money fast. So I started as a stripper at 18. The Great Recession happened a few years later, and so I moved to escorting at 22. First job as a dancer was with 2 other girls to a private party. I had something of a debut, and while I had no idea what I was doing, I had my heels on and I knew how to shake my butt. I had literally $200 in singles just rained on top of me. 30 minutes of work. Who knew how much the other girls made? But I was hooked. The economy took a huge downturn a few years later, and so many of my regular hot times were not as prolific. I only worked on call, private parties, bachelor parties, rush week, etc., as I wanted to stay out of a fixed location due, but this would up hurting me in the long run. I turned to escorting, through an agency who actually was pretty kind, and I'm still amazed I never had to audition for any of my agencies. He set me up with a John who was an utter gentleman, kind and considerate, explained his side of things in a way that made sense, and helped me find peace and less of a sense of guilt about what I was doing. I saw him a couple of times, but I think after that my novelty wore off, which is fine. Every once in a while my thoughts float to him and his beautiful golden retrievers. I hope he's living a good life somewhere. I'm pretty sure my life would have went a different way without those 2 experiences. And don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of just raunchy, awful, ungodly, unforgivable things done and said to me in my career for the sake of rent. But holding on to the few bright moments I had helped me make it through to financial and familial freedom as well as retirement from the industry. Dancer here. I remember being chill and excited about it. This was 20 years ago. The next few times were a little more nerve-wracking because what does an 18-year-old have to say to middle-aged men? Ya know. Took me a while to get comfortable. Now I'm a pro and can't wait till the clubs open again.